I've never thought of myself until very recently as an architect. To me, that those sort of the labels are always challenging. I think like an architect because I've been trained, but I also think like a scientist and equally as an artist because I value the sort of the creative process, and I think inquisitiveness and curiosity is shared by all sorts of disciplines. I see it as an incredible time to be thinking about ways to continue our long-term engagement on the planet, and I think we have to be quite inventive about that, and being efficient with our materials and being efficient with our thinking is really important. I think my previous work was working with scientists, biochemists, etc., working at nanoscale as a designer, and so I felt that I developed lots of thinking outside of my architectural practice. And so I think it was a really interesting time for me to actually bring that experience into an architectural firm. Yeah, it's just been six months now since I've been here. Every architecture firm has a route, takes a view on how they're going to make architecture, and I think this is quite an open view, and that's how I see my role here. It's called a greenstone device, and it basically absorbs CO2. The algae sort of lives inside these tanks, and through the process of sort of its life, it takes in CO2, produces oxygen, and then creates a biogas. So it could be in tubes, for example. These are sort of examples here. So it forms a facade paneling. It becomes almost like gardening, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? It comes from a lab up in Scotland, in fact.
Okay.
So the different strains will create different efficiencies. I think London is really interesting. So we have so much access to different universities, for example. I think it's interesting because London has so many different places that are innovating, and so I think to work in London, to have an architecture firm here, really is sort of supports the ambition for the practice. This is even further into the future. This is a project where we're working with Dr. Rachel Armstrong, who's created a book called Star Arc. The question is, how could we live in outer space? We started off by looking at nature as sort of the inspiration to sort of create the architecture for potentially living in outer space. A lot of these structures are based on different types of algae. In particular, this is the structures come from algae that's in the Thames. By proposing these sort of theories, we're actually learning about what information we can actually bring back to living here. So a lot of this algae technology, which we can imagine 100 years from now, starts to inform the design that we're actually working with algae in the tank for projects for the here and now. This is sort of a futuristic vision. Even though I've done 7 years of architecture and 7 years of art and stuff, it feels like I'm just at the beginning now. Yeah. Because I've sort of managed to bring some things together. And I think for me it's really just feels like actually this is the right time to bring all these bits together. I think within an architecture practice like a studio, I think you can actually open up the opportunity. So that's why it's interesting. Yeah, it feels like I'm just at the beginning of my journey.